Good morning, everybody. Glad to have you. We'll allow others to join as they may, and otherwise nice to have a recording memorialization of some of this information because we're getting a number of questions around this TWI training within industry and would like to do it justice to give this session as some context from my personal journey, learning more about it, and then obviously welcome any of your questions and dialogue as we go through the content today. So hopefully you'll leave today feeling more clear, obviously, of what this topic is, how it can be impactful for your workplace, and mainly when you think about it as leaders and how we support our frontline managers and supervisors, that really is where TWI shines as quite a powerful tool. So please do feel free to add questions in the chat or the Q&A as we go through. I'll pause in between each of the modules and then give a chance for any dialogue. So as mentioned, one of the ways we want to look at this program is through the lens of developing our supervisors. And I'm not sure each of the industries we represent, but knowing my background with manufacturing, services, administrative, office environments, supervisors and who we call our managers really are the pacemakers and the heartbeat of each of our operations and processes. So they have the ability to turn off or on our productivity because they're dealing with all of the safety, the quality, service, cost, people elements at play, and that's what makes them critical to the operation. Pardon me, I'm getting a little feedback. So what we're going to look at today is obviously how to use TWI and some of these lean leadership principles to build this type of culture we're working on, and then also what type of skills are necessary to make these come to life. A bit more on who is informing this content for us. So we have the pleasure to work with a group out of Denmark called Business Through People. They have helped put together a number of these materials and references. So John Velma came down last year and spoke at our Lean Summit in November and also gave a great workshop. A number of you may have either been there or seen that marketed, and a fantastic mentor to me. Was obviously just speaking to him before to prep for today. And then likewise, I've included a number of screenshots from the book Toyota Talent, and that's from Jeffrey Liker and David Meyer. And David Meyer worked at Toyota Kentucky and was part of that initial team when they were rolling out the TWI programs internally. They might not have called it TWI specifically, but you'll see the origin and the principles shine through. And so I view this as the definitive reference and the textbook almost in terms of the application of TWI within that type of setting. So thanks to them for providing it. And then obviously we use that today to inform our thought process. Just to ground us a bit in terms of why we're here and perhaps why you're interested in this, we do recognize that people are critical to our operations. I said that a bit earlier, but obviously us being aware of that as the most important asset of our organization, using Toyota as an example here, and how do we focus on the development of our people in order to make a good product. So every day that I got to start my career there at Toyota Kentucky, we had that massive banner that said, good thinking, good products. And you can see that that origin lives globally, and that's the way that the entire organization thinks about it, as I know you do inside yours likewise. So our first viewpoint in terms of how this ties in, if we agree that our goal as an operation is to be a sustainable business, a profitable business, and obviously we have people within that, then we can look internally and externally at how those coincide. So when we look at the internal systems for our people, we're wanting to build a learning community, we call it, tap into our latent resource, our intellect, our knowledge that's available to us, and in the short term, developing capable people, and the long term, helping them learn how to improve and having mechanisms that support them to do that. And then as we look externally, we want to be known and recognized as a learning enterprise. So we want to have capable partners, whether they're universities or TVETs or technical centers that are bringing people in the door, or from a recruitment standpoint that we're recognizing industry as an employer of choice. That's our goal when we look at our external way that we attract and develop people, or bringing them in to develop them. And then also, how do we look at that longer term of what that truly means to be a learning enterprise, where when people come to work for us, they are leaving better off than when they entered in, and that we're aware that their development is critical to our success as an organization, but also critical to their success as an individual, whether or not they choose to stay with us and work for our company. From a business standpoint, obviously, we're looking at developing these lean systems to help us deliver products more efficiently, higher quality, lower cost, shorter time. And we want to do that through capable processes in the short term. And in the longer term, we're looking at how do we improve that end-to-end flow of value to our customers. And obviously, we're aware of all of those tools, and that's not the topic of today's webinar, but hopefully you'll see how that ties into the development of this type of people culture. And then obviously our longer term view for an external business, profitability, sustainability, and contribution to the communities and societies we work within, which is why I get very excited working with people such as yourselves in this challenging but very rewarding and beautiful environment that we call home in Southern Africa. So just to orient us a bit in terms of what is our purpose as leaders, what's our purpose as a company, and then how does that give rise to the need for this type of training program. Now, if we think about it in the vein of a team leader, supervisor, I'm borrowing this image all the way back from 1988. So this was sent around as an inter-office memo to the executives and the leaders of the operation in Kentucky when they were first opening that Toyota facility there. And it shows you that beyond just getting results, obviously we know we have to drive productivity. We know we got to have that balanced scorecard view, safety, quality, service, cost, people. But beyond that, it's how do we make a team of our team members, of our team leaders, our group leaders, and that is our job, is that we have development be a core part of that philosophy, that we're training them, we're building their capability to identify and solve problems, and that's how we have that foundation to do the other good work. So obviously that is what gives rise even more so to the need for this type of intentionality. Getting into some of the origin of this TWI, and if you've heard it before, you know the context with World War II. For those that are not familiar, obviously when you have a global war, you've got a lot of training you need to do, whether it's within the military itself and the forces there, or within the workforce to support that from a supply base, materials, all the rest. So you can see some of the intentionality that a military operation will have when it comes to their training. And I borrowed these on the right-hand side from modern day. It's one of the North American countries, the way that they do their year-long training programs for each of their units, and then also a weekly training plan. And we recognize that because in any environment, it's necessary, critical to train our team members. But I like us to think about it in this vein of when it's life or death, truly. And if we think about it in our businesses, hopefully none of us are in that situation unless you're in healthcare or otherwise. But if we look at it with that level of severity, then we recognize the need to train our people very well. And it doesn't give us an excuse to do it half-heartedly or an excuse to do it inefficiently or just assume that it gets done, take it for granted. It means we need to have a system that guarantees it is done to a certain degree where somebody's life can depend on it. And I know that sounds maybe too heady for where we are in this point of the discussion, but that's how I'd like us to orient ourselves when you think about training as such a critical input to having a quality system, both from a people and a results viewpoint. That's where I find this very special. So a bit more on the roadmap there, and thankful to the U.S., we did at least charter this development of the TWI programs, and that was done in the early 1940s by the Department of War, and they commissioned it based on the need to say we sent off all these troops over to Europe and Asia, and we had a workforce that was largely made up of women, as you know, and we have to show them respect and train them how to do the work because where they're coming in fresh, they don't have some of those core fundamental skills that we need to have, obviously, to get the work done. So job instruction was the first module, and that was how do we train somebody as efficiently and effectively as possible. We'll talk about the detail of that momentarily, but then job methods came about based on what we've learned and how we train. How do we then improve the work that we do so that we can question it and build on it, make it even better? And then we also recognize the need to have job relations. So people weren't getting along with each other, managers, team members, supervisors. And I'm sure none of you have that problem, but that was the rise of the job methods and job relations, I should say, and how do we develop those productive channels of communication, interaction between our team members. So that was in the 1940s, and I'll show you momentarily that trained millions of people across thousands of organizations. It was a widespread success during that war, obviously part of the success of the victory of that for the Allied forces. And then through the aftermath of World War II, it did go over to Japan, and that was through some of the quality gurus, Deming and Duran, and the PDCA thinking, quality management thinking. And it was kind of brought in as part of that initial lifeblood of what we now know as the Toyota production system and the lean manufacturing setup. And it was part of that Japanese economic miracle eventually. In the early days, they were obviously looking at it and said, this is a highly successful program that we would like to build on and replicate in our world, as it was done in many other countries around the globe as well. So if you Google it, you'll see it's done in Australia, New Zealand, Oceania, a lot of European countries, some other diaspora as well. So it really is quite incredible how it went from the US, that development, which had a lot of academic input as well as corporate input, and then it had that spread across the globe. It did go quiet a bit in the late 1900s, and people, I don't think, recognized clearly why, but didn't have the same publicity. And it came back into vogue in the early 2000s, and thankful to a couple of gentlemen in the US that helped do that. And Lean Frontiers, they run an annual conference that I was just attending in April in the US, and they had that TWI Summit. So it's now become even more back in the forefront. And I'm glad for that, because I find that these principles, the way it's based, that origin of that process and the way you'll see these cards structured is something that we can really learn from and build on. And I have the good fortune of working closely with, who I mentioned before, John Velma, who has been part of the development of TWI and implementation for the LEGO group internationally, and part of a unique case study of how they've rolled that out at their manufacturing locations, and likewise along with many other companies that they work with. So grateful to learn from them, and also to learn from some of the other pioneers of this. So as we said, the initial figures here, about 2 million people were trained with these TWI programs, and that's job instruction, job methods, and job relations. And that was across, as we said earlier, several thousand facilities. And what we found there was that we have these nice, clear ways of looking at these diagrams that allow us to see each of these facilities, each of these people had common needs. And we wanted to have the ability to instruct well and consistently, improve the methods, the way we're doing the work consistently, and then have that skill in leading our workforce and our people. And in order to do those things, we need to have a knowledge of the work, which is that specialized technical knowledge, and us breaking down the job in a way that makes it very clear and understandable for people doing it, people on the floor, so that we're not reliant on engineers or highly technical resources. We want our whole workforce to have that level of specialization, if possible, which is enabled through good training. And then also have knowledge of the responsibility. So that's that leadership piece, that reality that we need to develop our people. That's part of what we do, the development and the performance review of our people, how we support their growth. That's also a knowledge of our responsibility. And again, that also requires that management commitment to have a much longer term view than what you might be able to use these tools to just get short-term results. So it has to have both short-term results through good instruction, good training, good improvement, longer-term viewpoint, development of the people, development of a strong organization through that leadership philosophy. So to give you a bit more detail now that we're painting a high-level picture of each of the programs, again, job instruction, job methods, job relations, each program follows a very similar 4-step method. And what's quite nice about these, you'll see the cards momentarily. I should be wearing mine around my neck, and that's the standard as a trainer, that you have that card with you at all times and you're following it. And not as a gimmick, not as a way of showing your superiority, but as a way to say, I want to show you respect to follow those 4 steps. I want to have my standard around my neck at all times, that I am able to demonstrate not only my knowledge of it, but my consistency of application. Because if I'm doing it in a different way from somebody else, it doesn't have that same power. So I'll talk more about that momentarily. Each method is explained using the language that is used on your shop floor. And that obviously is, if it's a specific language in whatever, English, Afrikaans, Zulu, Xhosa sense, then it should be used in that way. And the point of that is that we want to have it be intuitive, and we want it to be owned by the people that are actually doing it. We don't want it to feel like it's something that's done in the office or done in a textbook setting, academic setting. We want people to be able to have it feel very natural to them. As we go through a training rollout, which I'll also explain more about, we do like having smaller groups, and that enables better dialogue, back and forth discussion, and there's a significant amount of practical training involved. So with more people, it gets a bit more difficult to manage. When you have that smaller group, you can give very intentional feedback and have people be able to work through that during the week. And then each participant is expected to practice these methods on a real job. So it's not just classroom, not learning on theoretical. It's saying, let's actually bring a machine in, or a piece of equipment, or a part of our process, and we want to teach somebody how to do it, use job instruction. We can think about how to improve it with the job methods. And if we've got a case study of something around people, we can do a job relations application on it as well. So it's quite powerful when we can do that in the classroom for people to be able to truly realize there's immediate business results that come about from doing this training piece. And then some people don't agree with the standardized structured approach, but each of these programs have 3 levels. There's a basic training course, which in some applications is 3 days. Sometimes it's a 10-hour course, so different ways of looking at it, but each of them has that basic introductory level. And then you're only able to progress to facilitated training, obviously, once you've been certified at that basic training. And that, again, shows intentionality. It shows respect that you're willing to learn what everybody in the organization is learning. For facilitator training, that is typically done over a 5-day period, sometimes 30 hours is what it's called. And that obviously gets a level deeper, and it shows you how to actually train and how to instruct using that method that you've learned as a basic participant. And then the goal is you replicate that into a train the trainer course and your ability to spread that across your organization. So it's quite impactful once you get that flywheel effect going, once you have those trainers identified within your organization and have them doing deliveries on the floor and also training other trainers within the company. It can be quite fun to see the spread quite rapid after that. And then what is also standardized and structured is the way that the material is presented. So there's some nice participant guides, handbooks that walk you through as a basic participant, and also as a trainer, it shows you each of the points that you want to make emphasis on or be intentional about. You have those pocket cards I mentioned. You can wear them around your neck or carry them with you. And then the trainer manuals, again, give that one level down of specificity and the references and templates that you want to have. And why I show all this is that it's not philosophical. It's not something that is based on theory and it's your way of maybe doing it that you can make unique. The point is that there's a very clearly defined structured method that has been around for 85 plus years that works. And we know that it works, and the efficacy is very high. And what I find as respectful is say, let's use those standards. And then of course we can bring in our own examples, our own analogies that make it unique to our world, make it more powerful when we do those actual real job applications. But let's also follow those standards that have been developed over thousands of hours of application and feedback. So the ripple effect is what also starts to occur once we get going. And thank you to Mark Warren. He delivered a great webinar with that Lean Frontiers group recently around how this takes place. And what's neat about it is that it explains how each of these TWI programs help us to go all the way back to the beginning of a lean journey, of a whatever you want to call it, operational excellence, manufacturing excellence journey. And it says, in order to do any of those things successfully, we need to define what are the basic patterns, where the ways we're doing the work, the processes that we follow, the value stream, the value chain, the end-to-end flow, material information, whatever you want to call that. We have to define what are the basic patterns that define our day-to-day work, and how do we need to apply various tools and improvement methods in order to make that better. That obviously tells us what actions we need to take, whether that's a short-term containment, longer-term countermeasure, whatever vernacular you're using in your organization. The point is, based on the work, we have things that we need to do to either react to it or be proactive in improvement. And in those habits that we're building over time, all of those standards and structures and ways that we have our team members engaging, our supervisors engaging, the leadership teams engaging through improvement meetings, those are those habits and those behaviors that come about, the way we're speaking, the language that we use, positivity that comes about, a willingness to grow, openness, a growth mindset. That's all informing that culture piece likewise. So hopefully you're getting the idea that it's building that foundational, that structure, house, pyramid, whatever you like to think of, that if we're doing the small things well, following these daily disciplines that the J programs, the job instruction, job methods, job relations give to us, then it allows us to build and do more of the fun stuff that we say with some of this lean application and get better results as a business, which I know is fun for all of us. So with that in mind, let's move into a couple case studies, and I want to give you obviously more as we go through. Some of the ones that I have been fortunate to learn from with that Danish group. They worked with a parcel logistics company and recognized that team members were doing the work in a different way, and that they could go in and if they standardized that approach and did one simple job breakdown sheet, which I'll show you momentarily, that they could have 10% less empty space in the way that containers were loaded. And that was an immediate savings of over €1 million a year. So there was a quick hit, quick win based on this job instruction. Again, some of those daily processes that are followed for a bank and financial services organization, able to reduce training time from 15 days to 3 days, onboarding their team members, bringing them into the organization more effectively. With the wind turbines, obviously bigger up in that part of the world, training how they were doing bolt tightening. They had quality issues as a result of that and repairs and maintenance that were required. So they looked at it and said, if we can improve that with one single way of us doing it uniformly across the company, then we can improve that by 60%. And then the other one, and this was a large case study working with about 30 of the harbor terminals, the port operations around the globe, looking at the way the containers were tied down or lashed, and then improving the safety, improving the productivity of those operations. So quite fun. And why I'm showing you this now is that we're getting an idea of how this can work. And what I want to hopefully articulate to you is that it is also universal in its application. It's not just manufacturing, it cuts across services. So it really is mainly around that idea of consistency, stability, people doing things in a uniform way that we can obviously learn from for improvement. I'll pause here as well and give my personal anecdote with this. When I was in the room for a job instruction basic training earlier this year in Cape Town, I had a bit of an epiphany, a moment, and recognized that I've been doing my lean coaching and supporting organizations incorrectly. I typically go for a breakthrough type improvement, and I want to go for supporting the teams to maybe implement a new process or implement a new way of communicating, a new structure, a new meeting pattern, whatever, without maybe focusing first on how do we stabilize and make consistent the way we're doing it now. Because if we do have a current state, then we can go to a future state, but let's first look at this current state and think, how do we stabilize it and make sure that we're all doing it in the same uniform way? Because perhaps we can have some improvement that's already built into that. And that's where I felt convicted in my journey that I haven't been spending enough time thinking about how we can use one single job breakdown to improve the way we're doing it today before we jump to something new and different, hopefully better in a future state. But this is what I want you to be thinking about with these two, is that it allows us with these JADE programs to first stabilize, then we grow and build on top of that with the other forms of improvement. How do they work together? This is getting us into each of the modules here. So let's start first with job instruction. Job instruction is how do we train people according to the standard? And it's, again, let's have one ideal, consistent way of doing a job. I'll show you how we break that down to an appropriate level, by saying we want that uniformity and that consistency in order to be able to train to it effectively. We have one single way of doing it, one single way of training it, and then we can guarantee that everybody across an organization, whether it's tens of people or tens of thousands of people, that we have a very consistent way of us applying it. Then, when it brings in the job methods, it's saying we want to allow people to have better ideas, and we want to have that creativity come to life, which we know occurs whether or not we channel it. The point is, let's have a way that people speak a common language of how do we want to improve the work that we're doing. Because without room for creativity, we say people create their own ways of doing it. And I like watching it sometimes. It's great seeing the level of innovation, but without standardization, that innovation can cause even more chaos than if it wasn't occurring. So that's our goal with job methods, is guiding people to find ideas that create better work, better jobs for others to learn from. And then with job relations, we recognize that we have to maintain that trust and cooperation between our people, because we can't succeed as an organization without it. We can have some short-term wins simply by doing the work well and improving some of the work, but to have it be sustainable and longer-term viable, we need to have that people relationship and those people systems also working at a high level. So that's where we say it's helping people take ownership of the way they're doing it, and then building that trust between the team member and their supervisor. And one thing that I found very impactful around this is TWI prides itself on helping workers think conscientiously. And a bit of a mouthful, but for supervisors and team members to look at their work conscientiously, it means they're thinking not only with their mind, how do I do this? How do I follow these steps? What have I learned? What can I help teach? It's also with their heart. And that's why we say people need to know the purpose. And on a job breakdown sheet, you'll see the why is a third column, and it's helping them understand what is the clear why. If I don't do this, what's the impact to the customer? What's the impact to my team member that I'm passing this on to in the next process? And if we can say that they recognize that why and they can internalize it in their heart and their mind, then when nobody's watching, they have the integrity to do it right, and they'll follow those steps without somebody having to scold them or reprimand them if they don't do it. So that's a very powerful concept that I hope you see, is that we're training the hearts and the minds through these ways of doing it. And you need these 3 programs to help inform that comprehensively, holistically, to do it well. So let's get into job instruction as our first program. This is one of the original cards back in the day. I don't know exactly when it's from, but you can see kind of how it comes together. You've got the one side telling you how to get ready to instruct. We're saying, let's have a timetable. How much skill do we expect him or her to have and how soon? Let's break the job down. And that's the key important steps, I should say, with the key points. I'll explain more about that momentarily. Get everything ready before you go train, have things properly arranged, cleaned up, just as the worker will be expected to keep it. And then these 4 steps on the right-hand side, these have not changed. So what's so powerful with this, it's again, the way it was done back in the 1940s, the way it's still taught how to do today. And there was a lot of insight that went into it. There was a significant amount of academic involvement, significant amount of corporate involvement, as I said before, to say we need these 4 steps to occur. The system and the process doesn't work without us following each of these 4 steps. And when we do the basic training, we do spend a significant amount of time talking about each of these line items. How do we put somebody at ease, him or her? How do we find out what they already know about the job? How do we get them interested in learning it? And if they're not interested at that point in time, then we say, let's not do it. Let's not force it. We want it to be a pool for that knowledge, that information. Having somebody be in the correct position when they're learning, whether it's being able to see properly or being just to the side where they're going to be having that same orientation, doing the work. So that level of intentionality, I want you to pick up when we're going through the rest of this content on job instruction. Then what we say is that there are several iterations that are necessary from myself. I'm going to put myself in the shoes of the trainer when we're presenting it. First, I'm going to go through it carefully and patiently. I'm going to stress the way that we're doing the work and articulate it with the important steps. So how does the work advance as we're going through it? Then I'm going to talk about the key points, which is something that can injure the person, make or break the job, or make it easier to do. And we want to be able to show those as we're going through. And then we also want to say, what are the reasons why? So again, that internalization, why am I doing it this way? And I'm explaining that as I'm doing my bit to present the operation. Then I'm having the individual do it on their own and not say anything. I want to just see what I was able to convey to them and how that shines through in terms of how they're doing it for the first time. And then they're following that same progression. They're telling me the important steps. They're telling me the key points. They're telling me the reasons why. And I'm asking questions. There's room for dialogue. I'm correcting any errors that they're making. I'm taking responsibility for that, saying that if I haven't taught you appropriately, then you are going to be making errors. So I want to take ownership of that. And we're continuing with that. It can be efficient. It can be a matter of minutes, but we're continuing until that individual, he or she, knows that they can do the job well on their own. And then from that, we move to step 4, which is following up. Who will they go to for help? Who's a backup that can also inform them to the training? And then I'll mention something around follow-up. So that gives you a high level. We'll get into more detail. But again, we say with this, a very clear process. If we can follow this, we know it works. But if the worker hasn't learned, the instructor hasn't taught. And that's the key takeaway for our responsibility in this type of system, that we're doing it in a straightforward, consistent manner. And the goal is that obviously we're making our environment, I like to say, a learning academy, that we have so much knowledge and so much capability within our organizations. How do we have a very clear way of training that allows it to be done in a manner that is respectful? One quick story I'll tell you from a basic training I was in recently. We had a trainer as our example, and they came up to the front of the room, and they were going to go through their current state of how they train their team members, and they train many hundreds of team members a year across a several site operation. And when they were first doing their training, their demonstration, they were doing it very ad hoc, and like I'm presenting a little bit and just speaking what's on top of their mind, and be difficult to replicate word for word. And they were going through an operation that was quite simple, how to install a new piece of equipment. And I think they got about halfway through and recognized that the way they're doing training now is ineffective. And this lady, she actually broke down into tears a little bit, because she recognized for many years, I think for about 25 years, she'd been a trainer in this organization. She understood that she's been doing it poorly. She hasn't been showing her team members respect through that single demonstration, and say, I can't replicate this. I can't do this the same way every time. So every single person I've trained has gotten a different version of me explaining it. And therefore, I can't guarantee that there's repeatability, that there's consistency. I can't be mad at somebody when there's a quality issue on one and not on the other. And that aha moment was so powerful for everyone else in the room as well. And of course, we wanted to empathize with her and feel for her. But that was our recognition of, wow, if we can follow these steps, then we can truly have a clear way that we have a consistent level of skill that we can all develop and share across. So let's talk a bit more detail about this. How do we efficiently train people to do a job safely, correctly, and conscientiously? A couple of the questions that we hear oftentimes is, well, why do we need to do this? And hopefully I've given a little bit of reasons why, but some of the thought process from a leader, how do I transfer knowledge more effectively, develop my supervisors more rapidly? They're struggling, we're struggling to get results, struggling to train. It's something we always get to last, but I want to do it. Safety, people aren't using safety equipment uniformly or effectively at all, maybe. So we want to train on that. There's human errors that we're recognizing from quality. People are overlooking certain tasks or skipping certain tasks. So we want to build in a mechanism to support those. And then likewise with standardized work, we've invested all this time perhaps with our lean implementation to go do that authoring and illustrating and having that all nicely printed out and put together, but people aren't actually following it. And then how do we feel like our new hires, when they're coming in for the first time to the organization, that they can add value quickly? And then likewise for people within it, as they're progressing through, how do we help them build skill and be able to promote and progress through the organization? So that's some general themes in terms of where we see necessity give rise to this job instruction implementation. A couple of the steps, and this is a little bit of repeat, but hopefully shows you in a different light. These cards, again, are a little bit different formatted from what I showed you earlier, but pretty much the same exact information with a little bit more modern day language there. And what we find, again, everybody that has that blue card around their neck or in their pocket, they've learned how to do it. They've spent that time in a basic training. It's their license that tells other people that they've learned how to train. They're trained to the same standard approach that everyone else that has that blue card is trained to. And what I find very powerful is that if somebody goes into a training, once they've been aware of this job instruction, and somebody isn't following that JI method, then immediately they'll say, this isn't respectful. I'm learning from you in a variable way. You can't repeat this. I can't repeat this. So can we please follow what's on the card? I'd like to follow those 4 steps because I know I'm going to be able to do it well. I know you can teach it well. And that's where I really see it come to life, when people hold those cards and those 4 steps in such high regard that they can't think of doing training without it. And that's when you know it's working. Then how to build that into a system of PDCA, so that plan, do, check, act. That's where we say we need a training plan. We need to be able to look at each of our teams and understand where we have changes or gaps to tell us when we need to do additional training or have a refresher training. And if we can have that mechanism telling us the plan, then the do is us following those 4 steps. The check and the act is what results are we getting, where are we having issues or difficulties on our balanced scorecard. Maybe there's more training necessary. So it's creating that virtuous cycle that is managed within the team. It's not something that human resources is doing or the training department's needing to do. It's something we say the team can manage, and it's a self-supporting, autonomous way of looking at it, training being critical to the work that we're doing. So let's look at the job breakdown sheet. This is the lifeblood, the core piece of how we do job instruction. And you'll have different application, obviously, but this is the way we want to think about it. The important steps, as I said a bit quickly earlier, it's a logical segment of the operation when something occurs that advances the work. And it's something when we're changing the fit, form, or function. It's when we would look at a value adding step that we're actually doing something material to the work. The key points as we move through is we're saying anything in that step that meets any of these 3 criteria. So the one is, will it injure the person from a safety standpoint? If so, we want to call that out as a key point. Will it make or break the job from a customer standpoint? So we're saying from a quality viewpoint, will it not meet the specifications that are required? Or is it something that makes the work easier to do? Simplifies it, something that you can go on feel that somebody's learned over years of doing it. A knack point with a K, you might have heard that term before, certain way that somebody's learned that can be better or more efficient. And that's where we want to capture those likewise, so that's consistent and we can show that's the best way we know how to do that currently. And then the reasons, that's the reason why for each of the key points. So that's the nice way to think about these. The what is the important step. What are the steps that advance the work? The how is the key points. How do we do this in a way that allows us to be safe, have high quality, and do it in the most efficient way? And then the why is why do we want to do it? That respects the customer, respects our team, and that's a nice framework we can think about. The what, the how, and the why. A bit more detail, and thankful to Toyota Talent for this example. This is how it can come to life. Obviously, in a manufacturing example, you can use this for your own. So you can see each of the steps as we're progressing through, telling you which part of the operation you're in. Then on the key points, it's got those same ones there, safety, quality, and the technique. And then we've added in cost, how to use the materials properly. This is, you can see the level of detail. It's sufficient, but it's not inundating. It's not an overwhelming amount of text or language. Again, we want to use language that the team members are using at the shop floor. So I want, as I'm demonstrating how to do the work, I want to be able to say I'm grasping it at the top and the back, and that'll make perfect sense to the person that does that operation. Pull out 2 to 5 inches, I can understand that, might demonstrate that size, etc. So as I'm working through. And then when I'm going into the key points, I'm telling you, well, why? It's easier to get a good hold, a firm grip when I'm grasping it there. Less won't work, more will cause a crease if I don't have it correctly demolded. So you get the idea as we're working through this, is that it's a very iterative, clearly intentional way of us describing how to do the work. I'll show you this as well. I feel like it's timely in this point of the presentation. It can feel overwhelming when you think about, if I go back one slide to my breakdown, how do I have this level of definition for every job in my company? That seems impossible. And at first I agreed with you. I thought the same until I recognized that, okay, where do we want to truly begin? It's where do we have either quality defects that are occurring? Where do we have a bottleneck in our operation? Where are we having consistent errors or mistakes that are occurring from a team member viewpoint, or frustration or headaches that we're hearing? So let's start with those, and those jobs or those steps in the process. Those are our first targets for what we want to do with this job instruction, to be able to break it down to a better level. So how do we do it even more to that work breakdown structure? We say, let's look at the complete job. Let's slice that into individual tasks within it, or sub-steps, however you want to think about that. And then we want to break that down into individual kind of micro steps, step by step, thinking of how do we make that work progress? What do we need to do? What are the moves? What materials do we have? What tools do we have available to us? And then even better, now let's go down and break that even a level deeper to how do we want to train that, and be aware of where things are located. How do we want to bring materials aligned? How do we actually do the assembly of that? So you can hopefully see this structure coming to life, and it becomes more intuitive as you're applying it. But if you can think for a moment, where in my process today do I know we have repetitive quality issues, or repetitive breakdowns, or equipment failure, or downtime? Or where do I have an issue across shifts where somebody in the morning and the evening, they're doing it differently and it's causing a variation in the product output? That's where we want to think, okay, how could I break that down in a way that would make sense to train it using that type of job breakdown structure? So keep that in your mind, and then we'll come back to it. The way also I like us to think about this is that we think of this job instruction training. We say we're going to commit to following those 4 steps. We're going to commit to the way we're preparing for that training, for that worker to be ready to learn. And then our goal with that is we're saying standardized work is our basis. It captures the current best way of us being able to do a piece of the operation, a piece of the work. We want to analyze that, understand where we can eliminate any of the waste. We want to capture, again, what's the best way of doing it after we've done that bit of work and that homework. And then we have a baseline for continuous improvement. So that's always available for us to improve. And that's that part of that job method, which I'll explain momentarily. How do we build on that and consider how to make it better at all times? But then the goal is, with that job instruction, us following that card, is saying we want to be able to teach in a way that enables our employees to be highly skilled and to do it uniformly and consistently, because that gives rise to better performance, better results. So we'll come back to this, obviously share these slides with you, but I want you to have that clearly in your head that it's not different from standardized work. It's building on it to say standardized work captures it in a nice format, and you have the various different types of formats in your organization, I'm sure. But if we're committing to using that job instruction training as our lens that we teach people how to do it, then it gives rise to that consistency, which is a very powerful equation and combination. Then I mentioned on step 4 of that blue card, in the job instruction flow, we have follow-up. So that's a critical part of this. So people say, okay, I can do that once. I can teach somebody following those steps. Somebody can show me that they've learned how to do it following those steps. but then how do we make sure that we have that stabilized over time and part of that standardized approach? So here's a nice checklist to be able to show, okay, we've prepared. This is going through the card. How do we prepare them to put them at ease, tell them the job, present the operation, try it out. And then what we're learning here is that, okay, let's give feedback on the way that the training was actually done. Did they adequately learn the task? Was there confusion? Did they struggle with any part of that? How will they incorporate that into a subsequent training of that part of the operation? So that's built into the training. And ideally, you have somebody observing and giving that feedback in real time so that your trainers are developing their training also in real time, plan, do, check, act. But then also to the point that there's a follow-up and a process confirmation that's built in afterwards to say a week or maybe a couple of weeks after that training takes place, my job as a trainer is to go work with that individual and say, can you show me the way that you learned how to do it back during that training? And can you please explain to me the important steps and the key points and the reasons why? And it's just a quick knowledge check to say, how effective was that initial knowledge transfer and being able to do it consistently from the way they learned it. And if you have that virtuous cycle saying, okay, we're training according to a standard, we're going back and evaluating, are we still following that standard, or have they learned how to do it in a better, more efficient way? We can build that back into it. That's where you have that loop going that enables us to keep learning and keep improving. So more to say on that, but hopefully you're understanding that this is all part of that plan, do, check, act framework that we're able to iterate and develop quite quickly through. One other way of us thinking about this, and some nice some diagrams, different types of training for different types of jobs. Obviously, we can't put a hammer across all of our nails. So the goal is, okay, let's understand what are the requirements across each of our types of jobs. How do we want to standardize it? What format is best? Do we want to use a job breakdown sheet, which is maybe higher level? Do we want to get all the way down to a work element sheet, which goes through step by step? And this is your judgment, obviously, within your organization to say, how do we want to capture our knowledge in a clear way that's not overwhelming, that isn't just living in a binder collecting dust somewhere. It's at the point of use, ideally, that we can use in real time, but also for people coming in as new hires or fresh to that department or operation, how do we train them effectively? So this can ideally be a nice way and a nice reference point for you, again, from that Toyota Talent great reference book. So last point on job instruction is around the training timetable or training plan. This was the initial format that was used back in the day to say, okay, let's look at our team. We got our team members across the top, and then let's look at the jobs within, or the way we want to do our work breakdown sheets or job breakdown sheets within that team structure. So those are down the rows here. And then our job is, okay, as a team leader, as a supervisor, who do I need to train by when? And that's where we're looking at what changes or gaps do I have in my team that tells me where the critical priority is for a point in time to go invest that knowledge transfer to take place following those 4 steps. And you'll see that the check mark means they've been trained. There's process confirmation confirming that they know how to do it in the uniform way. If they're a half dash, it means they've been trained perhaps, but they're not fully confirmed yet that they know how to do it in a certain way. And then you can also see when, okay, somebody's scheduled to leave that team or retired into the month, so therefore we're going to need an extra person to be able to do it. So this is part of that problem solving that moves into that cross-training matrix or flexibility chart that says, where are we strong and weak as a team? And me as the supervisor, I'm identifying that. I'm going to know it whether or not I have this reference. I can see it or I can hear it day to day. But the point is, let's put that on a nice, clear plan that immediately informs me of what action I need to take to do a refresher or a training based on that awareness. So this was the basis, and I recommend starting with this type of level of detail. But as you've probably seen, this gets a bit complicated very quickly when you go into that multifunction worker, that skills matrix, training matrix, whatever you've learned how to call it. And this is showing a very similar framework with a bit more detail, obviously, to know who are my team members, what are the processes or operations that they're working on, and then where are they in their journey. Quarter, 25%, I'm in training, half is doing it maybe to a safety level and quality level, but not quite the time. 75%, I'm not able to do it consistently quite yet. And so that's where you want to have whatever language makes sense for your world, have it in this type of structure to know where do you want to prioritize training to occur. A quick story on this also, where oftentimes these training matrices can go wrong is if it's only a representation of where things are today. and we'll see them on the wall. You'll see them nicely printed out or laminated with that information that shows this kind of grid view, who's on the team, who knows how to do what. But what's missing, we say, is that plan, do, check, and act. So I want to know as a team leader, where do I have a gap or a need to go build capability for each of my individual team members based on what their development goals are. And I can see where are they now, where we want them to be in 6 month time, perhaps. And then likewise for the team, where do we have a deficiency at a process level to know that I've only got 3 people that can do this. I need to have 5. So my goal is to be able to train 2 additional. So that's that level of problem solving that immediately tells you where you can focus as that supervisor level of definition. So what we say as a final point on this theme is that we can break out of this cycle of struggling as supervisors, as leaders, and being firefighters. I know none of us do that regularly, but the goal is that I often hear it, I'm guilty of it myself, making time for training is rare. And we say, we got to get product out the door. We got suppliers calling up, customers calling up. We have urgent, critical things we feel like that are keeping us from doing this luxury of training and luxury of getting people off the floor, putting them in a classroom. My goodness, I can't think about actually doing that. So where I see it as so powerful with this job instruction is that we're saying we can do it at the point where the work is being done. We need to have some classroom training to train the method, have people follow those 4 steps and learn the cards. But then in a perfect world, we're doing that in real time on the job, that OJT concept, which you saw on an earlier slide. So it allows us to break out of that excuse of we don't have time to train people or we're not able to or whatever. We've got ineffective training, even if we do it, to say, wow, we can do this in real time at the point of use. We can see immediate results because we now have a consistent approach being used not only to train, but also to do the work. And that's allowing us to stabilize the results, learn from those results if we're training in that way, defining what's critical, transferring it. So it's that virtuous cycle that we're getting to, breaking out of that vicious cycle that, again, I know none of us struggle with, but that's the goal of why we're here, I'm sure, is how do we learn from this in a way that brings some sanity to what we know is a critical piece of our operation to instruct and train our team members effectively. A final point on this was a highlight of my year so far, and even maybe the last couple of years, if I'm honest, but we had John Velma come down from Denmark, where he's based, and do 2 successive basic trainings for job instruction. So we had a manager supervisor group in the room the first week, and then we had a team member, team leader group in the room the second week. And if you're not familiar with Green Thread Manufacturing, they're based in Pardon Island, part of that Cape Union Mark group. They manufacture some fantastic clothing, both ladies and men's. You can go out and find in Poetry and Old Khaki. And their team is not only, as you can see, just joyous and full of energy and all types of just creativity, but they were also so willing to follow these 4 steps as you see with the cards. That was part of that graduation of that basic training, that every individual is given that card to say they've learned it, they've practiced it, they've actually done an example, and you can see some on the job type stuff. We brought some of the machines into the room, using that as a way to demonstrate. And quite a powerful several days for me to be part of as a co-facilitator, learning from John likewise, but also to do my own trainings and my own simulations and feel the power of following those 4 steps. A little bit of discomfort at first, obviously, to be able to learn something new. But then when you get the hang of it, you recognize that it can be immensely powerful. So again, a highlight, and would look forward to sharing any more of that experience and hopeful to have the similar experience in your environment one day soon. So as a bridge to our next theme here on job methods, we want to remind ourselves, how do these work together? So job instruction, we spent some good time on that. That's training people according to the standard. So we have a standard for how we train. We're following the standard of how we do it during the work. We're building on that standard as our standardized work to have a basis for improvement. But then now let's think about that improvement piece and say job methods gives us a way and a lens that we can apply in order to build on that. So the original card here, I'm going to go over the detail momentarily, but the quote that I really like to see is that we are making the best use of our workforce. So manpower was the previous term, but our team members, the machines that we have available to us, and the materials. So it's what we're saying, what do we have now in our operation? It's not saying, what are we going to go out and buy or invest a lot of money in? It's saying, let's think of making the best use today. Greater quantities, quality product, less time. And that's obviously a goal for any of us. So continuously improving the way jobs are done. This is what I would say is most intuitive or familiar for those of us that have been on a lean journey and doing this type of work. And that's what I love with job methods, is that it gives us a standardized approach for how to do that. Because oftentimes I'm guilty of it as well. We have different ways of using the lean tools and different ways of driving improvement. But if we can be disciplined and commit to saying that let's follow what are these 4 steps for the job methods card and program, then we can have that be a nice basis for improvement, which we can replicate and scale more effectively. So some of the questions here from a leader figure: how do we get better results without me having to invest a bunch of money? I know a nice question to answer. How do we improve more quickly? How do we move from getting good ideas and capturing some of that feedback during a team huddle or a meeting, whatever, to actually making improvement come about from it, demonstrable improvement? And then how do we develop the skills in the organization to have better problem solving, identification, capability, and learning that continuous improvement flow? And then how do we also use these tools and this method to address safety and create that type of environment through this as well? So hopefully some good thought starters on why job methods can be powerful when applied well. So very similar from job instruction, we do have what we call breakdown sheet for job methods. And this is taking that one level down of definition and saying, let's put the details of our current method here. And it can build on what was on the initial job breakdown sheet. It can replicate that. So it's some of the judgment to say what level of detail do we want to add on this one, but it's everything that team member, that person is doing for the work. And we're capturing the distance, we're capturing the time. It can inform a spaghetti map if you're going to go off and do that type of analysis. And then with that, we're observing, we're saying, where are we seeing any of those 8 wastes, any of that motion or over processing, whatever, and you're finding that through it. You're looking at anything that's hindering them from flow or hindering them from doing it in a nice, orderly manner. Obviously, when are they struggling to get it right? And do we have a noticeable quality defect or an issue within that? Any rework that's taking place? And then what's fun, and it takes a little bit of homework, as we know, to work in current state before you get to future state, but then you can start to question every detail. And we all know we love doing this to say, well, why is it necessary to do it that way? What's the purpose of doing it that way? Where and when should it be done? Who else can do it like that? How's the best way for us to do it? Allows us to think about all of the inputs, the material and information going into that piece of the work. And this is where you have a lot of fun, again, when you're starting on this job methods. You cannot, and I stress that point, you cannot get to job methods before you've done job instruction, because you can see how random that would be. If we don't have a standard way for how we train, a standard way for how we do it, and a standard way for how we capture it, then you start asking these questions and you get a bunch of random feedback and a random idea set that's difficult to factor back into a way that you can train effectively across a larger organization. So when you've done that homework and you're ready to get to this point, then you can start thinking, how do we want to apply this new method based on our improvements, based on our concepts? We can start experimenting, bringing some of that Toyota Kata viewpoint of where are we currently, where do we want to get to in a target condition, and then we can think of what's the details of the new way of us proposing and then doing the work better. So some of the key themes on these questions is, how can we eliminate any steps that are non-value add or non-value add but necessary? If something is not necessary, if it doesn't have a clear purpose to us internally or to our customer, that is a good candidate for elimination. And then when we're thinking where, when, and who, it's, can we combine any of the steps? Can we rearrange the workstation or the layout to make it more efficient, flow better? And then also with simplification, do we know, is this the best way for us to do it? Is it the shortest time, lowest cost, highest quality? And are there any key points or knack points or ways that people have learned over the years of doing it in a certain way that we can make it better for the rest of the team? So similar thinking, a bit more different level of scrutiny with job methods. So with the 4 steps here, we'll go into some of the details. Step 1, we're breaking down the job. As we mentioned, it can build on what you had from the job instruction breakdown. You can do it fresh if you'd like to, as a new viewpoint, but we're saying all the job details exactly as it's done today, capturing current state. Let's go and see. And we're noting down observations as we're doing that observation. When are they walking back and forth, et cetera, waiting. So like you know how to do with those 8 wastes and doing that type of analysis. You have that captured, then you're asking those 5 W's and 1 H, and that you can read obviously the why, the what, where, when, who, how, and then you're thinking about, again, safety, quality, design, tooling, the way that the operation is set up physically. Then it gives you the chance to move to step 3 with the development of a new method. We've talked about that. And then with step 4, this is similar with that plan, do, check, act type thinking from job instruction. We need to obviously have that here. So we're applying a new method, we're getting support and some pre-implementation before we actually go out and do that improvement. We're getting buy-in from the people that are doing the work. We're getting support from management to do the implementation. Ideally, it's low cost or no cost, but if there is investment required, we're getting that approval, obviously, through whatever CapEx determination. And then we're using job instruction. This is where it's fun to build in that what you've already learned so that everybody knows how to do it and does it in a consistent, structured manner based on what they learned with job instruction. So then you're applying it quickly. There's some rapid iteration. People are giving feedback on the new method. Is it working? Is it not working? What can we do to improve until a better method is developed? Then we can standardize that. And then we're monitoring that throughout. So powerful in its application. And then a nice one here, again, back to the people system, giving credit where it's due. We're not saying that this is an engineering or a technical or a leadership initiative. This is something the team members can drive at their point of doing the work, and something that the supervisor, thinking back to our theme of this presentation, the supervisor can help facilitate this and encourage this and make it a nice to do, not a need to do, where people have the autonomy and the ability to be creative and think about a better way of doing it. And then they have some 4 clear steps of how to follow it, and that we can help guide them and hold them to that as an accountability measure, but also making sure that it's obviously done consistently. So some of the other questions, relationships, you can obviously borrow these as you're going through, but our goal is using our brain, not our wallets, getting better results at low cost or no cost, very much in line with some of the origin of that lean thinking. I love this quote from a case study up in Denmark with Danske Bank. It's like a rake in the garden using job methods, gathers everything that's no longer needed, straightens everything else. So I think us having that viewpoint of when we're doing this work day to day, we can get lost in it sometimes, and you have pain or frustration doing it a certain way, but like, when do we have the chance to actually look at it and question it? So I would say every so often, maybe it's something once a week, we can have a team input on what are candidates for us working on this job methods within our process. Maybe once a month, we have a day that we can dedicate, or half a day that we can dedicate to actually doing it, following those 4 steps. And that's where it's quite nice that you can have that cycle building on itself and getting rid of what's no longer needed, straightening everything else. Very good. So that was a whirlwind on job methods. We're going to move now into job relations as our final of the 3 J programs. And we've talked, obviously, job instruction gives us that basis, gives us the standard. Job methods gives us a way to improve that, ask those questions. And then job relations is, hey, we have people working together to identify and solve problems. There's going to be friction. That's a guarantee, and hopefully positive friction. But in other worlds, we know that that's not always the luxury we can count on. So job relations gives us a way of dealing with issues that arise, problems that arise, dynamics that arise, and also a way for our managers and supervisors to have clarity of how do we give credit when it's due, and how do we follow a standardized, uniform approach to do that likewise. So we'll come back to this. This is one of the original cards. I'm more show you this just as a history lesson, just some of the datedness of it, but how it has not changed over the years of how we're currently applying it. We do recognize our role as a leader is to develop our people. And I love on the original one here, it says a supervisor gets results not with their people and by using their people and by tapping them for every bit of productivity that they're able to give. It's saying we get results through our people. And that's the thought process of this relations piece, is that if we're going to get results through people, we have to actually build trust and motivate them in a way that's sustainable and ideally intrinsic. It's not just driving a whip. And it's not just having whatever disciplinary action. It's saying we want to support them, encourage them, and have a way of doing that that's repeatable, obviously. So how do we develop and maintain good relations to prevent problems from happening, and how to effectively resolve conflicts that arise? That's the theme of job relations. We'll take a quick look at these questions, but obviously similar themes. Why are we not getting cooperation? Why don't people want to use our safety equipment or do things the way that they know they need to do? Why do people resist our quality standards? Why won't they follow our policies? Why do they don't accept changes or accept the room for improvements? And then why do people leave, or why are they choosing to quit and stay, or quiet quit, or whatever it's been called recently? So these are some of the questions that we want to be scrutinous of with this job relations piece. Is how do we learn how to make our team members want to follow us? It's not forcing them to follow us through a matter of power or position. It's saying we want to build that naturally through this capability. I do like this quick overview when we say, okay, what's a problem? And we'll use traditional Western, so American, European, whatever you want to include in that category. And it's fun. Whenever I get to do a workshop in person, we say, how do we know we have a problem? And people will say, oh, it's when I get an email that's urgent, or when I get a phone call or a WhatsApp that's urgent, and I get a slap on the wrist or whatever. That's me messing up. So that's when I know I have a problem. Where we would say in a traditional view, and let's not use Toyota as the only, let's say in this type of mindset, it's when we have a deviation from standard. In simple terms, it means what's happening now is different from what should be happening, or what we've said is the standard way of it happening. And that distinction is critical because it gives us all a common viewpoint that we say, if we know what that standard is and we can clearly identify that as a deviation, then we have a problem to solve. And that's something we want to celebrate. We want to understand why. And it's not a blame game of saying who messed up and who can I point the finger at. And that's what you see here with the difference of root cause analysis being who are the 5 who's that I can go blame and tell them to fix it and do it better next time, versus how do we have a system that builds in that 5 why, that root cause analysis, intentionality, something short term that prevents it from causing too much damage, something longer term that is a countermeasure that prevents it from happening again, and that type of intentionality. So this distinction, I think, is critical for us, not only as we're doing problem solving, but as we're doing this type of job relations piece that we say, if we have a bunch of managers or supervisors all running around, choosing the way that they want to manage, choosing the way that they want to determine when we have a problem, who's responsible for it, what we're going to do to fix it, then we're going to have a very different way of having that resolved across the organization. And that can be chaotic, as we all know and as we all feel. So that's what the power of this job relations piece is, that we say we have a uniform, consistent way that we know our supervisors, the people closest to that work that are in a managerial capacity, that they're following these steps and they're able to learn from it and share what's working, what's not working based on a consistent application. Some other benefits that I find in job relations is truly powerful. And I think in today's day and age, we're having more discussion around mental health, discussion around workplace safety, not just physical safety, environmental safety. We're talking about psychological safety. And that term can be a buzzword, but I think it's powerful when we break it down to say, not only do we want to build people's comfortability with admitting that they've made a mistake, putting their hand up, saying, I've got a problem here, or something I did, it caused a problem. It's saying, how do we respond to that? Obviously, how do we build in a culture where we can have a positive response to that, a learning response to that versus a blaming response to it? And then what that enables is, obviously, if people have that confidence, feel that safety at a core level, then it allows us to do this other stuff, this other job instruction piece, this other job methods piece, to make those improvements in a way that is sustainable. Otherwise, we're tricking ourselves. If we start doing this improvement, we start doing the standardization, we start doing this training in a way, and in the moment people start putting their hand up and maybe rising above the crowd a bit, if they get chopped down, if they get made fun of or belittled or whatever, made to feel stupid or inadequate, then you better believe they're not ever going to participate in that again until they choose to maybe leave the organization. So it's a vicious cycle, and I feel pained how often I see it. And I've obviously been part of these organizations, and you work to break out of that. So it's something you need to be intentional and aware of. But this is also where job relations is so powerful, because it gives supervisors a very simple, straightforward way to break out of that. And I think oftentimes we can say, oh, geez, how can I develop them the same way I have my executive teams? They've gone off and they've got degrees, they've got experiences, they've got all this other executive training that they know how to do this in a more effective way as leaders. But our supervisors, man, they don't have all that. So what I love is that this gives them a leg up and says, if we follow these job relations steps, we can treat them in a more expert capacity, because they already have the job expertise, the subject matter expertise. Now we're giving them a mechanism of how to be a leader and how to do that effectively and sustainably in their sphere of influence. Another part of this, and I borrowed this from John Velma, and he did a great training with one of the terminals I mentioned, one of the ports globally, and they looked at it as a great way of bringing back in that gender diversity and inclusion. And they said that job relations piece was part and parcel of how it was initially brought about back in the war times, because it was a largely women workforce, and it was saying we want to create a way where we can work together effectively across gender lines. So I know that's in the everyday vernacular at present, and we want to be more aware of that, to say we're applying consistent ways of developing our performance, developing our people, regardless of race, ethnicity, creed, religion, etc., gender. So again, powerful with how we do this in a uniform manner. Another side that I find fascinating, and it was something that came about during the Lean Frontiers conference I attended back in the US in late March, early April. We gave a presentation, or one of the presenters spoke about emotional trauma, and it felt a little bit out of place at first to say we're talking about all this life stuff, this reality that occurs to people outside of the workplace. Oftentimes, what's the relevance to talk about it in the context of job relations? And what was so powerful is that we said in a room of people, how many of us have experienced these forms of life trauma? And by the end of a long list that was quite painful to hear and feel, only one person in the room was left that said, I hadn't experienced any of that trauma. So I felt grateful for that. But the rest of us have obviously experienced a significant amount of life reality and life trauma. And we carry that with us every day, every opportunity to lead. We have a cloud in our minds that is our own worldview and our thought process and the experiences that have shaped us. So I think oftentimes we do better than others at compartmentalizing and keeping it to ourselves. But the goal with this whole job relations piece is that we say we want to have intentionality. We want to allow our supervisors and our team leaders to be able to have real, honest, open dialogue with their team members, to know what's going on outside of the workplace, to know how that's affecting them in the workplace, the work that they're doing. If they're having a bad day or a bad week, it's not just snap out of it, get back to work. It's saying, hey, I want to truly know, and it's respectful. Can we have a one-on-one? Can you tell me a little bit more about what's going on? Is there anything I can do to support you? So when you hear that, I know it can feel contentious, or maybe just too difficult to get to because of legality or because of confidentiality or whatever. But I would say in this type of workplace, when you have that level of trust that's present, it really is powerful. And it feels like when you're coming to work, you have a support group, you've got a friend mechanism that's built in, part of that hierarchy of needs, acceptance, all the rest, being part of a community. And then even more so, now I can go off and do my job. I can do my job well, and I can now improve my job because I feel that emotional safety and I feel that presence within this group to do it. So long-winded viewpoint and maybe a little bit off tangent or off topic, but that's where I see the power of this job relations piece, is that it brings in our ability to truly lead and truly support our people. Motivational interviewing being a great framework and method of how to do that, asking the right type of open-ended questions, giving affirmations, helping people reflect and understand their own current thought process of why they're doing something in a certain way or not doing something in a certain way, summarizing it, mirroring back to them. So I would say this level of intentionality, it can feel like a luxury because it sometimes requires going off the campus or off your facilities footprint to go learn how to do it. But if you can build this in very simply to what I'm going to show you momentarily with this job relations piece, then you can really have a nice virtuous cycle that comes about internally within the walls of your operation. So on job relations, and I'm recognizing I might have actually left that card out, so let's go back momentarily. So with this one, we're saying on the front side of it, it's how do we have a foundation for good job relations? So the key part of it is how do we let each employee know how he or she is getting along, and that in terms of their quantifiable, measurable results. How are they doing with productivity, with quality, with safety, et cetera, following their standards? Can we give credit when it's due? And that can be through whatever form, team huddle interaction, or a one-on-one. Ideally, we're having that dialogue. And while it's fresh or while it's current, that we can give that and help people feel reaffirmed. And then telling in advance about changes that will affect them. And so we're communicating, and that's part of our job as leaders, is to communicate over and over again and speak about what's happening at a strategic level, leadership level, that might affect them ultimately and affect their day-to-day and their work, making the best use of each person's ability. And that's giving rise to the job instruction, that training plan, that matrix is where are you now on your development journey? Where would you like to be in a future role? How can I support you to get there? I don't want to be a barrier or a blocker to that. So we want to give you the right avenues to explore. And it really is saying we're treating people as individuals, and we're creating a win-win long-term view of how do we support this person to get better within their current job. By them getting better within their current job, we're going to get better as an organization or as a team, get better results. And it's driving that PDCA at an individual level development standpoint. So on the backside of this card, our 4 steps for job relations is around how do we handle a problem? And again, the power of this is if we're all applying this and following this in a standardized way, we know good things happen when we're doing it. So we're saying step 1, getting the facts. Let's actually plan, understand, break the problem down a bit better than we might react to in our current state or how we do it at present. So we're looking at what obviously we have internally that will apply to the situation, talking about common law in our vernacular, whatever's happened in our organization previously. We're getting enough of a view to make sure we have the whole story. And this is, again, when conflicts arise, when issues arise, problems arise, it's saying we're not jumping to a conclusion. We're not just jumping to discipline. We're saying, let's make sure we got the whole story to consider. And then weighing and deciding, we're looking at the facts, we're looking at what possible actions are there, we're doing an evaluation, checking against the different motivations of other people of the group or the team members, whatever, selecting the best actions, and then we're ultimately moving into that do and that check, taking action. How can we handle this myself as a supervisor? How can I handle it as a team member? Considering time and place, relevance, and then checking on the results. So much more to be said about this job relations side, but hopefully you're seeing the power of it when it's applied to some of the people development, some of the conflict resolution, having a consistent, straightforward way of us being able to do this and to train our supervisors in how to do it. Pardon me while I jump through a bit. Our final topic here, I want to leave a little bit of time for any questions. So just reflecting again, final bridge, how do these programs fit together? We've spoken about it at length. Now we'd like to think, how do we do an implementation that can be across our site, across our organization, our department? So this gives a high level view back to what I was able to learn from Mark Warren there in that webinar. It's saying we can have a way of doing the work, our method, our current state of us doing it. That informs the job breakdown. What are each of the steps, the important steps, the key points, the reasons why? That allows us to have a basis for job instruction, to do that training. That then informs the way we want to have our standardized work captured, build a training plan, have a skills matrix, have that cycle with the work standards and how we do that development and training to it. And that's the baseline for improvement. And then underneath all that, supporting all that, is a positive improvement culture that's also tying in that job relations side, that we're handling conflicts well when they arise. And we have that trust that's been built between the team member and their team leader, their supervisor. So that gives you a decent flow just to kind of remind us where we are on the journey. Obviously, all of that following that plan, do, check, act, PDCA framework, as I've been saying several times today. This is a bit more of a detailed approach, and I borrowed this from my team at BTP with the Danish colleagues. So this is what we would condone going through. And as I mentioned, we had one of these recently in Cape Town when we did this management training, and we did it on site. So we would do some preparation, obviously understanding where are we now. We do like having an understanding of what problem we're trying to solve. So some of you might call that an A3. So let's understand current state. Do we have an issue with retention or turnover, people leaving? Do we have an issue with productivity, issue with safety or quality? So why is it even relevant for us to consider doing any of these TWI programs? And then how do we want to get started is the dialogue that we're having in step one there. We want to do a brief introduction to how the J programs work, something like this webinar. It gives you an idea of the overall flow. And we want to capture any other concerns, any other people that we know are going to be resistors or whatever other stakeholder analysis that you would typically do. That's all part of the preparation. Then it is critical to do management training. And it's saying we're not jumping straight to people doing the work, the supervisors, the team members. We do need to invest some time as leaders to first learn it ourselves. And I like a quote that says, your job in the organization is to teach, whether that's as an executive or a frontline manager. But in order to teach, you must know how to do. And in order to do, you must actually learn how to do it. So that's the point of us as leaders investing in that leadership training or management training to say, we need to understand how this is applied for ourselves. So we need to commit to a couple days to know, how do I do this job instruction piece? How do I follow these 4 steps? And be able to then show respect to our team members that are going to go off and learn that. Then we would do a pilot. So we, like I said earlier, where do we start? Where are we having the most issues within our operation or our process? Quality, safety, productivity, whatever customer complaints are telling us we got a problem. That's where we want to say that could be a pilot area for us doing this type of application. And I'm using job instruction in this world because that's what we would say is traditional to start with that. You can start with others, but that's with caution, of course. So with job instruction, it's nice because it can be a basis to get into the other programs well. So we would, for that, say, where do we want to go apply that standardized training approach, standardized development of a job breakdown sheet, and that's where we want to say is our pilot area. Then internally, we're doing a bit of a spot the trainer talent, we would call that, and that's during these initial training events and some of the engagement with a team. It's saying who in the organization has an affinity or capacity to train well. And as we know, not all training is created equal, not all trainers are created equal. And as I said earlier with our story of the trainer delivering it in a variable way for that many years, we're saying who is willing to follow the standard process, and when we see them practicing it, that they bring life to it, that they bring energy to it. It's charisma that comes about, gregariousness that comes about. So it's that X factor that we say. It takes it from being just okay, tick the box, do this 4 steps, follow the job instruction, to making it something that people truly want to be part of, and there's a positive momentum behind it. So that's part of that fun when we start working with a team, and when you start to identify within your organization who really has that personality to be an effective trainer. That's where we want to tap into them, and then we can invest in their capability and say we're going to develop you and do that train the trainer process to allow you to ultimately go off and help develop others with that capability that you have. So that's kind of that first phase. We're doing basic training. We're doing some train the trainer with a smaller group that we've prioritized and focused on. Then once that's occurred, we do follow-up coaching. We would recommend that once you've done those practice iterations, you're going to do what we say 10 run-throughs of your job instruction, 4 steps. So you're picking maybe 10 parts of your process, or you're focusing on the same couple different times. You're going through that, committing to that, learning how to do it well, going through that discomfort of learning a new way. And then obviously that is happening within and across the organization. Then you're learning from what results do we have, because we're going to start seeing some initial short-term wins, efficiency, quality, safety, all the rest. And then we can build on that with subsequent train the trainer events and other basic training. So that gives you an idea of how it all kind of starts, comes together, and that can happen, we say, a matter of days for the individual events, but you can do it obviously over weeks or months in context of other requirements of your location. Also, just borrowing this from Toyota Talent one more time, this gives you an idea of how it's proposed in this context. So again, looking at who are our trainers that have that capability and the affinity for it and are willing to lead and develop others through it. And then we're looking at where we want to focus, what pilot area, what are the skills that we want to look at first. And then we're thinking step by step, how do we do the breakdowns? How do we do the practice, et cetera? So you can look at both of these, think about it, of how it would work for your environment, but hopefully it gives you a level of definition. Very good. So on our final note here, I love this, and it talks about the development of this type of system, people development system, improvement system, recognition, performance management system, whatever you want to call this system. It's a virtuous cycle, but we say in order to have exceptional people, we need a consistent way of creating exceptional people, which is what job instruction gives us. It's a standardized approach that's built on the back of whatever our form of standardized work is, whether that's scribbles on a notepad, whether that's nice clear binders or something electronic on an iPad or whatever. It's saying we want to have a clear way of defining how do we do the work today, a clear, consistent way of training how to do that work. That allows us to have exceptional people because we're all growing at that same level. There's not individuals who are exceptional. We're saying we have an exceptional workforce because it's consistent. And then we have that definition. Through that definition, we have stability. Through that stability, we can start to look at more difficult tools in that lean toolkit, flow, and pool. And obviously that allows you to keep building into the future. So we're not jumping prematurely. We're building the foundation. We're getting the discipline and the structures and the habits and the behaviors defined. And then we're able to progress to the next step. So fundamental, simple, but not easy, as we like to often say. Very good. Well, let me pause there. I know that was a mouthful. Thanks for bearing with me through the presentation. I hope you feel a bit more clear about what this TWI training within industry topic is. And I welcome any feedback, whether you want to come off of mute and ask, or I can take a look at the Q&A. But let's have a couple minutes here of any dialogue if you'd like. Just going to look through the chat. We've got the question answered on the slides. Of course, we'll distribute those. Would anybody like to start us off with a question? How would you measure success? That's a good question, Benjamin. Like that name. And if you want to maybe help me with some specificity, success of a TWI implementation, or what would you characterize success as our topic? See if he caught my question of invitation. Thanks, Benjamin. So obviously the first measure, which is not as concrete as we'd like, is how many people have we trained? So it's how many people have gone through the basic training, how many people have gone through the train the trainer cycle. So that's a leading indicator to tell us, okay, have we built the capability and have enough people learn this standard approach that then it can give rise to the results. Then obviously, if we're looking at the pilot area, as we're going through implementation, we want to say, what were our baseline metrics? If we were having quality issues that gave rise to it being a priority, or lead time, productivity, whatever it is, efficiency, then we want that to be measurable, quantifiable. It has to be in order for us to justify the investment of time. So I would say it's part of any kind of implementation flow of having that balanced scorecard. But beyond success being how many people can we touch and teach, it's saying let's quantify that down to the point of business results that show better profitability, sustainability. What I also find too, just while we're waiting on another question, perhaps, what's quite powerful is when you get beyond that initial phase and you get that first momentum built, first energy, people are aware of how these programs work. They've been trained on that 4-step method with the job instruction typically. Once it starts taking hold internally, and once you see that first wave of trainers who have been developed doing their own trainings, and then getting that same energy in their workshops and their rooms and their training environments, and then they're bringing more results to you, that's how I would measure success. Is not just individual one-off improvements in different pilot areas. It's what's the replicability, what's the scalability effect of us applying this across the organization. And that with, I can speak to this, I think, with that port operation, we trained, it was several hundred team members across those 30 sites. And now those several hundred are training more, several hundred. And so it's quite fun. You see on LinkedIn all the posts and everybody in different parts of the world that are celebrating their wins and their learnings. And that is completely autonomous, thriving on its own at this point. So I'll come back to you on that one of managing resistance to change, Benjamin. But Rory, thanks for that question of the advantages of TWI being so old. So old, is a little bit alienating. I think there's some old is wisdom, some experience. I like to think of it in that same vein of these TWI programs, because of the amount of investment, and I mentioned it a little bit during the presentation, but there was a significant amount of intellectual capability that went into putting those cards together. Some of the best universities in the States at the time, even global insight as well. And then also the businesses came together to say, how do we distill best practice into 4 steps across these 3 programs? And if you can imagine how difficult that would have been to actually get consensus on that and how many iterations and waves of improvement, like, man, if it was able to stand the test of that pressure, and also over the years that it's been applied consistently and still has that same demonstratable effect, then who am I to come up with something that I believe is better? Sure, I can have my own application of it, and I want to tailor that language to my world, but I need to respect a principle-based standard that, again, has existed for many years and trained millions of people in the same way. So that's why I look at it as being advantageous, is that we're not reinventing the wheel or having to come up with something new age or something AI derived. It's like, this was something people derived that works. We know it works. Stood the test of time, exactly. So Benjamin, I'll come back around to your question of managing the resistance to change. And that's, I think it's universal of any type of change. I mean, we humans struggle at times with change. So what we need to first do is define, how is this not just making it different, how are we making it better? And that is the purpose of these TWI programs, is say it gives us a verifiable way of doing that through the instruction, through the improvement, through the relations piece, however you're choosing. So that's how I would say, first, we need to have that communication, get the people in the room that are making decisions. That's the role of that management training, or the need for that, to understand what conflicting viewpoints do we have, and be able to work through that. So I would say it's unique to your environment, but a good question to ask. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate you letting us know. Any other questions? And if anybody would like to come off mute, I would welcome that too, for a little bit of another voice than my own. Pompey, I see your hand, double hand in fact, if you'd like to share?
Yes. Okay, thanks, Ben. One question that I've got, I want to understand what are the best feedback mechanism for supervisors, especially in an environment where people are working shifts. For instance, if maybe there's a change in a standardized work, then how do they communicate so that all the shifts are aligned? What do you suggest?
Yeah, very good question. What I would say, Pumpy, is my first element is how do we commit to that consistency? And I often see it in different environments where if you don't have that commitment, then each shift manager or each supervisor kind of thinks they can do it their own way. And their way is what they know how it works and they get results. But if we can first kind of get them in the room or have the right setting to say, guys, we need to, or guys and gals, we need to commit to having a consistent approach of how we lead. And we can use that tool, that leader standard work, and as a way to say, how do you get results with your team and how are you having successful feedback from your teams? And then can we share that across? So I think that initial phase is important for us to say we have to have a commitment to consistency across our shifts and our supervisors that are leading that. And then how do we give that feedback? That's where I think we got to have the basis again. And then I think once a week, maybe it's meeting with each of those. And if you're the leader of those supervisors, you can bridge across those shifts at different times in the week and be able to learn from them and give that what's going well, what we need to improve, that type of reflection. So those are the quick answers coming to my head, Pumpy, that we need to be highly intentional about it, but first commit to consistency. So I can come back to that, but thanks for that question.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead. I see another hand there. If you don't mind sharing.
Okay, I've got a question. I was just interested to know in your experience, what is the ratio between trainers and staff? Obviously, I mean, if it's a new person that needs onboarding, then obviously they're going to take more time. But I'm talking about the normal run-of-the-mill kind of, is there any experience in terms of, you know, what you found to be effective?
Great question. And you'll get different numbers from different people in terms of how many certified trainers you need across whatever size of the workforce. In a perfect world, I would say the 5-to-1 ratio is quite powerful. And that's what we would say is ideal for a team member to team leader relationship. And I would also kind of echo that sentiment with ideally your team leaders or your supervisors have been trained on how to train. And that way you can guarantee that their team members are learning that consistent approach. And at least initially, I think if you're going to go out and say, how many trainers do we need to develop in order to then have that sphere of influence, I would say maybe you could look at, okay, one trainer could go off and train like 10 of the other group leaders or team leaders, as we said before, groups of 6 to 10. So that's where you need to think, what multiplier effect do you want to have that could say, this small group of trainers that have that capability, we've identified them, they're willing to go off and lead a wider spread initiative. Let's look at that as a multiplier effect of 6 to 10 per certified trainer, that then we know they can go off and deliver that replicably. Good question. Okay, maybe one final question from Carlene there in the chat. How do we motivate employees to become trainers and avoid it being seen as more work? Is there merit in having a dedicated training champion in the business to avoid it falling apart? It's a great question. And obviously we hear that question of, that's not my job, or are you going to pay me more now that I'm a trainer? So what's nice is that with the blue card, I've seen it be powerful that once somebody has gone through that certification, that basic training, and they have the blue card given to them because it's kind of that license that they earn, then it's almost a little bit of a pride thing of, hey, I've got the blue card and you don't, which I don't always like, but at least it's the first mechanism of motivating somebody. Then I would say over time, it creates interest because people say, what do I need to do to get that blue card? Hey, that person gets to walk around and train. So it at least creates some of that initial interest. And then you can start thinking of those guys, this is part of our role as a leader. You can build a little bit more of the philosophical piece and get that response and have people understand more about their role and how it supports their team and how it makes their team feel to be heard and understood and trained appropriately. So that's where I have it more subjectively or qualitatively. And then at times, I mean, with skills-based pay or merit-based pay, if you do want to look at it that way, if you have that system, then of course you can think of that as, hey, you are learning how to train. We want to acknowledge you financially for having that capability. You have an additional skill. So if you can use that as a carrot or motivating force, then great. And then I would say the only danger of having a dedicated training champion is that you create a bottleneck. And also you create the feel or the thought process that, hey, only that person can train, or they're the best trainer. And I don't think that's relevant, because if you're training somebody on these standard 4 steps with job instruction, then everybody has that capability. At least they know how to deliver it. Their style will be different, of course, but we all have the same methodology. So I would say rather let's celebrate having a small group at first that can then build a larger group that's all repeatable, versus having one person be the dedicated resource. Awesome. Great questions all. Appreciate the engagement. Hour and a half goes quick when you talk a lot, but hopefully you found it informative, and look forward to any follow-up. We'll post the video on YouTube here shortly in the next couple of days. And likewise, an email will go out just as a follow-up with a copy of the slides. And I'm happy to have any other discussion. I'll happy stick around as well, Dr. Ashwell. I can answer your question there. If anybody needs to drop off, feel free. Go ahead. I want to respect your time. But if you want to hang around. So your question there, shop floor operators typically have volume targets to meet, sometimes at all costs, irrespective of how realistic those targets are. This leads to cutting corners, mistakes, but hiding it. How do you overcome this effectively? Good question, Ashwell. So I think that's also something we want to reiterate or focus on with our supervisors, is that we have to have that balanced scorecard. We are not just running a delivery-based organization. It is a safety, quality, delivery, cost, people. We have to have that mindset that we can't sacrifice something else in order to just deliver things on time. And so that's my first easy answer. The more difficult one is, how do we then have that built into our management system, or whatever you call your way of having your KPIs, your metrics, or your performance targets visible? Because if your only metric that people see is how many units out the door and are we on time or not on time, then of course that's what we're going to focus on and prioritize. So I think if you can start building in, hey, yes, we want to get it on time, but is it of high quality? If not, what's going on with that? Then we want to treat that with the same level of respect and severity, and then you can build in more of those. So I think it's obviously that psychological view of how do you present that information to your team, because whatever you present to them, that's what they're going to focus on, and that's what they're going to drive. So you got to be more comprehensive in how you're guiding them and then showing them over time as well. Very good. I see a couple of other questions there. We answered the desired ratio, case studies of success with companies with around 10 to 20 people. Definitely, John, we can follow up on that, so that you could get away with having a couple people that would be certified and could join a course, obviously, to support a smaller group. And then does one need to understand lean or to implement TWI? No, you can have a very surface level understanding of lean, but recognize the power of it, the potential of it, and mainly the philosophy of developing people. As long as you have that understanding and that commitment, then you'll appreciate the ability to learn the TWI toolkit. So good questions. I think let's leave it there for now. Thank you again, and hope you have a great rest of your week, and talk to you and see you soon, hopefully.